Dune is a 1965 novel by Frank Herbert, which has very recently been turned into a blockbuster film directed by Denis Villeneuve, starring Timothy Chalamet, Oscar Isaac, Zendaya, and a lot of other really cool people.
I'm really sorry. Like, I thought this was going to be a really good idea, dressing like this.
I can't move my face.
No, literally. This is this is going to have to... Ow, it hurts so much. Ow. You can remove yours as well now. If you're,
we are going to die of dehydration now.
Oh, you got it all in your hair? We still look really cool and Dooney, right?
Yeah.
It was absolutely worth the many hours of cosplaying production 100%. That we put into it.
I like these shoulder pads.
Thank
Those
you.
really do it for me.
I worked very, very hard. So we just saw Dune. We know nothing about Dune as like a franchise, despite our fantasy credentials. I feel like we've really let ourselves down there.
Shamefully, I have never read Dune. Sorry, I was busy reading Octavia Butler and other cool people.
Oh, don't try. No, I'm sorry. You have to own that. You have to be like, dudes, I didn't read Dune. Like, this is a massive, massive hole in both of our fantasy kind of vocabularies, really. So
it's true.
But essentially, we're going into it as people who don't really know where this story is going, and can only take this film on its sort of own terms and its own merits.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, we do have some questions, which we have organised into a very handy internet list for you now.
Question 1. Are film adaptations of Dune cursed?
In what way is it cursed?
Okay, so Dune has a long history of people trying to adapt it into film. One really big attempt to adapt Dune, and it has to be big, and I think the issue that a lot of people have is the sheer scale of the book. The books, there are like sequels, there are loads of them. It's a big story. There's a lot you can cover, and so I think this has been a challenge for a lot of people. So in the 70s, apparently, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who did The Magic Mountain, other trippy stuff of truly 70s flavor, apparently he had plans to adapt Dune with, frankly, like an insane cast and production crew. Like Salvador Dali was going to play the Emperor.
Oh, that answers the question that I had about the Emperor.
Pink Floyd were going to do the soundtrack. Orson Welles was going to be in it. Mick Jagger. Like, it was going to be like a full... apparently it was going to be an amazing, like, huge 70s production. He got Moebius, who's the French cartoonist, like, science fiction artist, to create storyboards for it. And there are, like, 3,000 pages of that, plus a script, which came to about 14 hours. And Jodorowsky was like, I have to do it this way. Of course, it did not happen in the end. Apparently, there's a really good documentary about the making of this film.
If only Netflix had existed back then. He could have had his 14 hours.
I know.
In fact, they'd have wanted more. Obviously, David Lynch, one of our favourite directors, has done a film adaptation in the, I want to say, 80s?
1984.
Okay, so we've seen like every single David Lynch movie. We have not seen that
Maybe
movie.
Apart from Dune.
Why haven't you seen the David Lynch Dune movie?
Well,
is this like where you say you're a massive Alan Rickman fan, but you haven't seen Prince of Thieves?
Mostly because David Lynch basically disowned his version of Dune. He had basically no say in the final edit, and when it came down to it, he was like, can you please just take my name off of this?
The editing quite important in David Lynch movies, famously,
yes,
right?
Quite famously. And it was one of his like earlier films after Eraserhead, and they were like, hey, do you wanna do Dune? And he was like, yeah, cool. So he got together a cast including Colin MacLachlan, Sting.
That sounds like an amazing movie. Sting's in that movie? Sting's in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. Sting couldn't be in a bad movie if he tried.
Patrick Stewart is in it.
Wait a minute. This sounds like the best movie. Okay, right. We replace this. Find a David Lynch one. We're doing David Lynch one.
The consensus is that David Lynch's Dune is like high camp. Sting wears a codpiece.
This is sounding better and better.
I know.
Wait
the more I
minute.
hear about it, the more
about?
I'm like, why did I never watch this?
Okay, so I've got a confession. I have watched it, but not properly. Okay. I watched it. Someone else on a plane that I was on once was watching it on their screen, like across the aisle from me. And obviously, I recognised it as Dune. I knew what it was. Yeah. But so I have seen much of David Lynch's movie Dune, but like silently, and kind of like with watching LCD at the wrong angle, kind of like look about it. And I can confirm it doesn't look very good.
Yeah.
But I might not be the best judge.
I think it's fine. It was kind of a commercial flop, but people think it's kind of cool. Listen.
Do Dune fans like it? Do people who like love the books and stuff like the David Lynch Dune movie?
Opinions are mixed. Apparently, there has also been a TV adaptation on like the Sci-Fi Channel in the early 2000s, and you can imagine how that went.
Wait a minute. No, I can't. Tell me more about that.
It's not really talked about.
Because it's too good, right?
Well,
because it's the holy grail of TV. How would you describe Denis Villeneuve's approach?
So you've seen some Denis Villeneuve movies.
What Denis Villeneuve movies have I seen?
You have seen the new Blade Runner.
I have. That was very good.
Yeah. So you could take that as like his approach. He also did Arrival, which I'm going to say is probably one of my favorite sci-fi movies ever made. So going into it, okay, my expectations were like, it's going to be visually really beautiful because he does really nice, like gorgeous colored, saturated, or in this case, desaturated shots, kind of sweeping, epic.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I feel like if we talk about the David Lynch movie being high camp and kind of just off the wall, this takes a very, very, I guess it goes the other way, and it kind of creates a very 2001 kind of feel, like the majesty of vistas and places. Not space necessarily like 2001 does, but very much kind of just the awe and grandeur, which is which again is incredibly represented in the soundtrack as well by Hanz Zimmer, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Okay, yeah, I have some questions about that too. But it's very much kind of like an override of the senses, you know, not a sensory kind of ride so much as a pure overload. You know, it's like awe and majesty and kind of just get in your face.
Yeah. But in my opinion, not like over the top, like not too much. It's not Michael Bay level explosions.
Oh, sure.
Explosions.
But like, I mean, Michael Bay is fast cuts that don't really make sense and frenetic energy, but this is you know, still shots or slow panning shots, sweeping shots, and holding those images a lot of the time, and just kind of, you know, washing over you this huge kind of like picture.
Yeah. So like say this is more like scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Scale is absolutely something I think we can all agree with, and I think scale is an important theme, like in the movie as well. You know, when we see the planetscapes of the various home worlds where everything is set, and you see the great houses, right, which are occupying these planets. House Atreides goes over to Arrakis, and instantly this great house, you know, the people of the house are dwarfed by this huge machinery and industry, which itself is dwarfed by the landscape around it, which itself is dwarfed by the sandworms that come up and eat all of it, which itself is dwarfed by the attacking ships that arrive in the sky later on and kind of blot out all the light. Much like kind of a small fish being eaten by a bigger fish, being eaten by a shark, being eaten by a whale. It's very much this kind of levels of scale, kind of each one's sort of bigger than the last and consuming the last, which gives it this real kind of sense of vulnerability and danger, I think, as well.
Yeah, and then also this idea of kind of like a desert drama. Like, I think I saw someone describe it as like T.E. Lawrence does the Phantom Menace. Like, I'll give them the first part. It's you definitely get Lawrence of Arabia vibes, but
it's more than just the desert scape that makes it feel like Lawrence of Arabia as well. So this book was written in 1965. There are many parts of this movie which could be described as, I haven't read the books, but I've seen this movie and I've seen bits of the David Lynch movie. And if I had to guess at which was the more faithful adaptation, I would say this, just because it's very much, you know, focusing on, it just feels like a more faithful book adaptation, right? Whether that's right or wrong.
Apparently that is right, and apparently David Lynch did take some liberties with storytelling, whereas this is pretty much apparently the half of the first book.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, that's another thing we'll talk about as well. But you know, there are some kind of ideas and representations in this, and therefore the book, I'm guessing, which could be seen as being old-fashioned, maybe. I have some questions about the coding in this movie as well, which we'll definitely talk about.
Question 2. Is Timothy Chalamet any good?
Okay, so the characters and the performances in this movie, I think universally are top draw.
They're good.
Okay, like there are some brilliant actors in this. No one of the level of Sting, obviously, but you know, there are some iconic performances. Like some of my favourite actors in this movie. I love Oscar Isaac. I couldn't tell you if Oscar Isaac's a good actor or not, but that doesn't matter. I love him in any movie I see him in. He's like a proper film star, right?
It's hard to tell through his beautiful beard.
That does so much for him. Also, 2B, question 2B, is Oscar Isaacs the smallest man ever born? It's like, I was just talking about, you know, scale over scale over scale, and it's really funny. You see Oscar Isaac standing next to someone, and someone who you think is quite small, like Timothy Chalamet, right? And he's towering above him. And then you see Timothy with someone else, and that person is towering over Timothy. And then you see that person with someone else, and that person is towering over them. And you're like, how small is Oscar Isaac?
You know when you can really tell is when he's naked. Spoiler, he gets naked. And you're like, That is the shape of a small man.
Do you think they had to get like an extra small chair for him to sit in that bit just so it looked like normal size? Yeah, he's a tiny man, but lots of film stars are tiny people. Jason Momoa, not a tiny person.
He's not a small man.
What did you think of him in this movie? Because again, Momoa is one of those guys I never quite know what to think of.
I feel like he plays a part. Like, he's big, he's strong, he messes people up. Like,
he's
his role.
He's also a loyal friend, right?
Yes,
this is something
exactly.
that Jason Momoa does a lot. He's the loyal muscle.
Yeah.
You know, he's not the kind of off the rails dangerous muscle.
No.
He's the loyal muscle who'll look out for you. And I think he plays that kind of part really, really well. And like, he's obviously an incredibly charming actor. Again, has a lot of presence, obviously.
So one thing that's really interesting about this film is you get loads of Zendaya, like, in posters, trailers. It's all like Zendaya and her lovely, cool face. She actually has a very, very, very small part in this film, which eventually I'm presuming will grow in the second one.
It's kind of set up for her to be quite important in the second movie.
But
right?
her actual presence in this film is quite small.
Mostly in kind of dream sequences and things.
Yeah, mostly.
Right?
I mean, as with all of us, right? She always pops up in our dreams.
Well, Zendaya is really weird because I love Zendaya, again, with a passion. Like I say, lots of my favourite actors in this movie, lots of actors that I really love in this movie, very few of whom I'd actually describe as actors. Like I say, Jason Momoa is a movie star. I would say that about Zendaya as well. Like, I love her. She's brilliant. I love her in everything I've seen her in. She's a really good actress, like a genuinely good actor. But I still don't even really think of her as an actor. Like, for me, Zendaya is someone that the world just decided is really cool and brilliant, and therefore she must be celebrated. Mm-hmm. She needs to be in movies and she needs to be on posters, and we just need to celebrate her. And that's what we do. And she lives up to it, and it's great.
Yeah,
but I think she's a genuinely good actor as well.
Yeah. I like her quite a lot. And then you've got Stellan Skarsgård.
Now that's a proper actor right there.
That I would call that man an actor. Who you take a minute to recognize because he plays an extremely deformed, horrific character.
And one of the major differences between this movie and the David Lynch movie in terms of camp as well. In as much as it's possible to give an understated performance in that part, he does.
But yeah, it took me a little while to recognize who it was, kind of buried in all of the prosthetics and.
Well, he's a proper actor. He probably just put that on for the movie. He's like, you are going to be winching me round on a crane, right? You know, like in that floaty stuff. So I can just do this. I can just put it. I can put it on because he's a proper actor. You know, he probably went full method on that. I hope he's feeling all right now. Don't lose it yet. You've still got another movie to do. So
you've got loads of quite good actors in this film. Josh Brolin is also in it.
Yeah, he's very good.
Yeah, he's good in it. So back to the question about Timothy.
So the story of Dune, right, is that you have this huge planet, which is a desert planet, but is supposedly the only source in the universe of this substance called spice, which is needed for interplanetary travel. We know it's hallucinogenic, it has huge health benefits, it has a religious meaning to the people who inhabit the planet Arrakis, also known as Dune. Which means it's at the center of this huge thriving galactic empire and industry.
Whereas the refinery of spice previously was controlled entirely by House Harkonnen.
So House Harkonnen have become the most wealthy house in the entire universe because they run the production of the most vital substance in the universe. So when the Emperor decides that they will give up stewardship of this planet and gives the honor instead to House Atreides, that causes this whole upheaval in the very power systems of the universe, right? So that's the story. And Timothy Chalamet is the son of the leader of House Atreides. So that's the setup. And as such, he is very much the central protagonist of the movie. Mm-hmm. And as such, how much you like this movie could well depend on your thoughts on Timothy Chalamet, right? Because he is front and center the entire time. He's not just our lens into the action most of the time. There's also a kind of a chosen one, prophesized mystical figure kind of storyline going on as well, of which he is the kind of central part as well. So there's lots of him lots of his face, lots of his floppy hair all over the place. And I feel like it's a good question to ask, is Timothy Chalamet any good? Is he good enough to carry a huge epic movie like this? Because it is very much on his shoulders, and the next one certainly will be too.
Totally. I mean, personally, I think he's perfect for it. He's like this little sliver of a boy. I think he's supposed to be 15 or something. He's just like coming of age. He looks really lovely and kind of vulnerable and small, and people make fun of his small muscles. Like in the movie.
He is like so tiny.
Yeah, he's tiny. He's got like beautiful floppy hair, that like catches the dust in the wind. And I like him as this, he's the figure of the story who is like the boy prophesied maybe to be quite important. He's the son of one of the most important guys in the universe politically. So yeah, he's got a lot resting on his shoulders.
One thing I can believe is that he's Oscar Isaac's son, because
100%.
Teeny tiny. Both of them. Atreides in my pocket.
Yeah.
I got Atreides Duke in my pocket. I got Atreides Duke's son in my pocket. Slightly bigger pocket, maybe breast pocket, but still. Yeah. All right, Timothy, go to your trailer. Okay, night-night. Into the matchbox. There you go, night-night.
Just does
So
it for me.
I don't love Timothy as much as you do. I haven't seen. You've seen him in other things that you really, really like, which I think is probably an advantage.
Yeah, he was brilliant in Call Me by Your Name. You've seen him in Lady Bird.
What was he in Lady Bird?
He's the guy she falls in love with.
Oh, I don't remember that. The journey of Paul, which is his character name, is set up incredibly explicitly right at the very beginning when he's having a conversation with Oscar Isaac, and they've just been visiting some graves and stuff like that. And Oscar Isaac is, you will become Duke. This is your thing. This is what's going to happen. That is who you are. And he says, well, maybe it's not who I am. And Oscar Isaac says something which marks him out as definitely going to die in the movie. He says, maybe you will, maybe you won't, but whatever happens, you will always be exactly what I needed you to be, my son. And I was like, Oscar, you're dying in this movie.
Done. You're done.
That was a death sentence right there. You were nice to your son.
Father-son bonding, it's over.
You showed yourself to be a caring father. No, you're absolutely dead in this movie. I'm really sorry. Rip, Oscar. I was hoping to see you in the sequel. Will not now. Then Oscar says, it took me years to find my way and decide, find my way into this position and to work out it was who I am. Maybe you will too. Give it a shot. And so like Paul's kind of path, his journey throughout this piece is very much laid bare there. Like it's the journey of, here's a guy who is he is the product of this great house, but also this very kind of like shady kind of sect of whisperers.
His mum is part of the Bene Gesserit, which is a kind of a sect of witches, I think they're actually described as, but they're extremely powerful women, all women, who are very witchy and dress in black, and also have some interesting powers, including the voice.
Yeah, and that's something that we see him training early in the beginning of the film. It's like it's a kind of a voice that you can take on, which compels people to do things.
Exactly. You basically, it's a bit kind of like mind control. And this is important because there are no boys in the Bene Gesserit. There should not be boys ever at any point.
Yeah, the kind of implication is that they choose what kind of sex baby they give birth to, and they all, she was explicitly told, Paul's mum, to only bear women. Yeah. And it's revealed that they have been kind of crossing bloodlines cleverly for generations and generations and generations to, create this ultimate benedictory, right? This person with a great mind that can kind of free mankind and help mankind, and that will be born a boy, obviously.
Yeah, it has to be a boy.
Yeah.
It has to be a boy.
So when Paul's mum is like, yo, I'm going to have a boy, that's kind of like this massive betrayal of her order, even though she still comes under their protection and what have you. So there's this amazing scene where we see Paul being tested by an incredibly powerful figure within the order.
By the mother.
Yeah, okay.
The mother of the order, played, speaking of great actors, by Charlotte Rampling, whose face you don't see, but whose voice kind of does everything for me.
It's said that we needed to test that he could control his impulses because he has too much power to be allowed to live if he can't, sort of thing, which is, he is set up as obviously politically very powerful, but also kind of, in terms of sheer psychic or whatever it is, power. He also is portrayed right at the very beginning of the movie as having prophesizing dreams as well, where he sees people and can tell the future and things like that. So he is very special. There's nothing Harry Potter living under the stairs about this. He's very much in this position from the very beginning of the movie and set up as such.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what one of the main themes of the film is, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, there's a lot for the young actor to kind of portray there. And for me, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's an impossible job for any actor, but he's one of those actors that, for me, in this movie at least, has kind of like a pane of glass in front of him, which he never really acts past. And I kind of, for me to like him, because like whether or not he portrays the correct emotions and stuff, and whether or not the character is supposed to be likable or anything, I suspect he is. But you have to have like a charisma, and you have to be very likable to be able to carry a movie like that, particularly when your character is so like uber powerful and Mary Sue-ish, right?
He's super powerful, but I think he's also being swept along by currents that aren't totally his control. Like,
absolutely,
he didn't choose to be trained in the way of the Bene Gesserit. That was his mum, and he was like specifically bred to like by them, and like mixing bloodlines, as they say. So he's kind of a product of eugenics. It's a bit of a shady business that they're getting into. So yeah, he has all these qualities. Whether they are like good or not isn't really straightforward.
Sure, but I'm just talking more about how the actor portrays it, and for me, he doesn't quite have that charisma to kind of hold it. Like the first line he says, he sounded like a Californian fucking surfer to me. He was like, oh mom, I had a bad night's sleep. Just like, not Keanu Reeves level, but there was still an element of the YouTuber doing Xbox fucking reviews, in his performance for me. I know. Look, he does a good job. He's fine.
I see him as a boy who's being swept along by currents that are much bigger than him.
I always think there's this thing, right? I feel like maybe he's got something of the Jude Law about him, in that every kind of person who fancies men that I know likes Jude Law and like thinks he's a good actor. Every person I know who doesn't fancy men cannot understand what is even attractive about Jude Law, because like, I am a cishet male, right? There are men that I find incredibly attractive. Jason Momoa, very attractive man. Yeah, absolutely. Idris Elba, incredibly attractive man. David Bowie. These are all people that we can look at and go, these are very attractive men. You look at Jude Law, and I'm just like, I cannot even see why he is attractive to anyone.
Not even when he had hair?
No, but obviously all people that do fancy men, they find him very attractive. And I feel like maybe this is the case with Timothy Chalamet.
I don't know. I think he appeals universally.
Well, I'm literally sitting here telling you that he doesn't.
Well, question 3. Is Dune just an allegory for the crude oil conflict in the Middle East?
Oh my goodness. Are we jumping in with this one straight away?
Listen, I feel like it's really good to get out of the way.
And I guess it's a way of explaining the rest of the story of the film as a whole before we can go into kind of more specifics. So the planet that they go to is called Arrakis. And it's all sandy. And the people who live there, who are called the Fremen, are very much like a nomadic, not nomadic, they are desert-dwelling people.
They're the indigenous people of Arrakis.
And they have many of like the Earth-specific cultural signifiers of that, right? So they are coded in a certain way, and it's not as Vikings.
No, there's kind of like an Islamic flavor coding throughout, like even in the language they use and their presentation and this kind of like desert culture.
And they are sitting on tremendous wealth of natural resources, which, they don't appreciate the industrial worth of, right? So for them, it's very much a kind of a religious thing, spice. They use it in a way to experience hallucinations and have health benefits and have kind of sensory experiences.
Yeah, so they're sitting on this huge natural resource which has to be collected and refined, and which various powers are vying over to have control of.
There's literally an empirical force who sends different occupiers to extract this natural resource and refine it and ship it all across the empire, despite and in doing so basically stealing the land and the resources from the natives there.
Yeah, so the Fremen don't really seem to have much choice in the matter. It's described as a fiefdom, right? Like they are there and there's kind of a colonial power that lands every now and then. It switches hands maybe and profits.
It's really interesting when Paul and his mother are on the run after the attack with Kynes, and she takes them to a facility which suggests, and maybe this is something that I'm a little stupid on for people that know all of the lore from the books and things, but certainly it seems to me in the movie that actually the Fremen are also originally kind of settlers there as well, and their intention was to create, use geomanipulation to create like a paradise, a water-filled, lush, verdant paradise on this planet, which they weren't allowed to do once this incredibly powerful resource was found there.
Exactly, and I think the implication is that if you green the planet, there will be no more spice.
Exactly. So the Fremen are kind of kept as this sort of desert dwelling, what is kind of portrayed in some ways as almost like a savage people. Certainly not like the technology fueled kind of industrial people that are the other settlers on the planet. And so they're kept in that state of uncivilization in a way by this natural resource that other people need. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like their civilization was kind of curtailed and cut off so that other people could extract this material. The other forces in the universe are also kind of coded in ways that we can recognize from our reality as well, right? So House Atreides are coded very, very European.
Yeah.
I mean, they come from this rainy, kind of windy, rocky planet where everyone's wearing really cool long coats.
Like nice little collars.
And they have such amazing beards, and their hair is also curly and great, and they play bagpipes, and they do bull fighting, and it's incredibly European. So, and some of that obviously is for the visual contrast between a very rainy, wet, windy planet, and then it just makes the kind of impact of arriving on Arrakis all the more extreme. And the fact that Atreides are shown as if there is a goody faction in this movie, it's them so far, right? They are our protagonists, and they are the ones that we get to know throughout this movie. So they're all very European.
And they're like a mishmash of European influences. And I think like the name Atreides is actually Greek, but they talk about bullfights.
Greece is in Europe.
Oh. Well, apparently it is the center of civilization.
Well, there you go then.
According to certain schools of thought. But so there's this kind of like Greek coding, there's like the Spanish bullfighting, there's the bagpipes, there's the kind of organized, I guess, like, European military sense.
All of Europe, yeah. They conquer by air and by sea. You were talking about Lawrence of Arabia earlier. There's very much a sense of that for me in the story as a whole, So the Emperor has made House Harkonnen give up the planet, and he's handed stewardship over to Atreides, but they know that means that they are going to get attacked, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's something you realize quite early on, is that they know it's going to come.
Yeah.
Right? They don't really know the scale of the betrayal, because as it turns out, the Emperor basically just wants to wipe out the house entirely and lends his own forces to it.
And the idea is that comes from a fear of how quickly the house has grown and exactly. the power that they've got.
Both in its kind of, it's like military and its scale and its growth, but maybe in Paul.
Yeah, exactly. And their view on how to approach power on Arrakis is very Lawrence of Arabia in that, there's these people out there in the sand, and unlike the previous people that were here, we're going to learn how to work with them, and I'm going to get them on my side. That's very much Oscar Isaac's kind of like plan when he gets there, even though he hasn't done like any reading about them at all. Like they almost kill the leader because he spits on their desk, and the dude has knives at his neck after doing that. It's like, did no one think to ask that maybe they do things differently over here, and that's a sign of respect?
Exactly. And thankfully we've got Jason Momoa, whose character is wonderfully named Duncan Idaho.
Beautiful.
Which is, I think, is the most like 60s sci-fi character protagonist name I've
really
ever
is.
heard in my life. Thankfully, we've got Duncan, who is a pilot, but who's also kind of come in a few weeks early, has gotten to know some of the Fremen on Arrakis, has gotten to learn their ways a bit, so he de-escalates when that happens.
Yeah, exactly. And so there is that idea that you get in Lawrence of Arabia of enlisting the locals. And, the locals, they're a bit uncivilized and they're a bit rowdy and you can't really trust them. But, we are the civilized people and we will, I'm not saying that's exactly how it happens in Dune, but there are echoes of that.
Of course.
Certainly, particularly when you remember that it was written in 1965.
Yeah.
With that said, is it possible to read some kind of like Soviet coding into House Harkonnen?
Ooh, this is interesting, actually. So Harkonnen is, could you say they're a bit fashy?
I mean, I think fashy is probably the wrong word.
They're barbaric, right?
They're barbaric in their might. Okay, so they're brutal.
Is
how they're described.
Is the right word for it, I think.
But they have. It's interesting because they are described as having like all the money in the universe. They have the main source of wealth in the universe, and they are in charge of it, and they take profit on it. They do it with the blessing of the emperor and on the orders of the emperor. But they are extracting the profit from this planet, and they do so brutally. They haven't bothered to engage with the Fremen at all. In fact, there's like this very one-sided guerrilla war going on between them as well. And so it's very interesting that when you do see their like homeworld and where the leader of them lives, it's very dark and very angular and not very luxurious and not very gilded. It's very stark and matter of fact, which is what made me think of the Soviet thing, is because there's this idea of, look, they've got all this might and they've got all this money. They don't even care. They don't even spend it on nice things like iPads. They spend it on like really harsh, horrible, like kind of black walls and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like their ruling like ideology is just like pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And so apparently they are extremely rich, but it's just brutality kind of reigns. I mean, and they're governed by this baron who is like grotesque, and he loves taking like steam baths and eating, whole chicken legs. Like I think that's the only sign of like kind of decadence or indulgence.
It's a very personal decadence just
exactly.
for him.
It is purely for him.
That's not like, it doesn't seem to be kind of represented in their culture as a whole.
No.
Which seems incredibly barren considering, like presumably all their wealth goes towards like military might, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's kind of like ringleader, and the guy kind of calling the shots among the military for the Harkonnen is Dave Bautista, of course.
Is that who Sting played in the David Lynch movie?
No.
Oh!
No.
I thought it was.
Do you want to know who Sting plays?
Is he in this movie or is it a spoiler?
Nope.
Okay, well, I don't want to know them.
Yeah.
Fuck it, tell me.
He plays a character who doesn't even show up in this film at all.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's enough. Don't tell me anymore.
I know.
Because I'd seen like him camping around
over
my guy's shoulder on the plane.
Yeah.
And I assumed that was...
Me too.
Me too. Interesting.
And of course, Dave Bautista plays Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I kind of can't look at him without thinking of that character.
Well, especially he's basically dressed like Drax in this movie.
Yeah.
It's like, give the man some hair. It's almost like, he's not
allowed to have hair.
You know how Patrick Stewart, a lot of his casting clearly comes down to, we need a bald man.
Yeah.
What bald men can you think of? Patrick Stewart? Sounds good. So we need an old bald man. Get Patrick Stewart. We need a young bald man. Get Bautista, right?
Yeah, but like a muscly bald man.
Yeah. Oh, and of course the other force that you have is the Emperor themselves, who we don't see at all.
We don't see the Emperor at all. We don't know where they are. We don't know what they do. All we know is
we see like
that
emissaries right at the very beginning, kind of handing over power.
Exactly, and we know the Emperor is extremely powerful because they have decided to kind of have this switch of power on Arrakis. We also know the Emperor has like an absolutely savage military force of their own,
which he lends to House Harkonnen, right?
The Sardaukar, who are like the only time we really see them is when they're fighting, and also when House Harkonnen goes to kind of like enlist a few of them to help them just smash House Atreides. You see these guys being like crucified and blessed, like as part of their training.
Again, is that part of their training?
Well, okay,
I'm just watching it. I assumed that the crucified people were like human sacrifices to kind of like bless the training.
It could be too.
Maybe they drank all the blood, because then they were getting like the blood put on their heads.
Yeah.
As a kind of a sign. So maybe the people who didn't get through the training were sacrificed and their blood. I don't know. But either way, it's pretty brutal, right?
Yeah. So you know that these are, I think they call themselves the Emperor's Blades.
There are kind of undeniable sort of real world kind of links and themes that you can draw from Dune. I don't think it's particularly important in terms of enjoying the movie now or understanding the movie now, and it's clearly not making like a political point, right? But those kind of coded elements are definitely there, and it kind of is a bit weird not to be aware of them if you choose to like talk about the movie, I guess.
Exactly, and they're all in there, and it's actually worth pointing out a little bit about Frank Herbert, who I was reading a bit more about. He's actually a really interesting character. Like, he started writing Dune because he was researching sand dune movement, like for the US government. I can't even remember where. It was like a really just basic project. But he apparently was like anti-Vietnam, but pro-Nixon. He's a relative of Joseph McCarthy.
No way!
So yeah, he has this quite like mixed heritage and perspectives that you might not expect, because I know a lot of people talk about Dune as this kind of like, it's a parable about environmentalism, like all these kind of themes come in. But Herbert himself he was coming from quite a few different directions, and so you can see how Dune might be taken to mean different things to different people. But I think that's quite like enriching, because it doesn't have like an explicit agenda or an explicit kind of political bent. I think the whole point of it is that we kind of take away from it what we want. So of course that's the book, and I think that also comes through in the film adaptation.
Well, the movie absolutely leans into those kind of archetypes and those kind of real world equivalencies, right? So when those kind of parallels are so thickly drawn and ladled on, it's kind of impossible to not notice the kind of industrial imperial forces coming to take the natural resource from the sand people, right?
Yeah.
Who do the chanting.
Yeah.
And who are more brown than the other people we meet. So to answer the question, I guess, is it an allegory for kind of imperialization of the Middle East?
Not directly.
No.
I'm just going to say no, but I think it's a device that you can use to kind of think about the story if you want. And of course, we've only just seen this first bit of the story. Who knows where it's going to go?
Oh yeah, I don't think the Fremen are baddies, put it that way.
Yeah.
Question 4. Does spice harvesting happen in the day or the night? Because I've seen this movie, Evitel, and the movie starts with Zendaya telling us, "Oh, my planet is so lovely when the sun is going down. And when the sun goes down, that's when they do their harvesting. And they're in a race against time to get all their harvesting done before the sun comes up in the morning. It's too hot to do anything." And that's when the Fremen attack, right? That's the whole opening sequence of the movie. And Zendaya is literally telling us they've got to do all their harvesting in the night, and they're in a race against time, and it's shown to us, and there's an attack. And then every time we see harvesting throughout the movie, it's in the daytime.
It's because you couldn't see it otherwise.
But
it's a movie, Sally.
No, it has to be consistent. Like, it's fine to have harvesting in the daytime, but don't tell us that it only happens at night, right at the very beginning of the movie.
Okay, I agree with you. I think there are a few...
Sorry, I'm getting Velcro all over. I'm stuck. This is Velcro tape, okay? Look, I made myself abs. Like on the suit.
Beautiful.
Like on the suit.
Beautiful.
I worked so hard on this suit, but now I'm just sticking to everything. I didn't plan it.
Yeah, so this kind of raises a couple of interesting questions. Yeah, like, what's the deal with, like, the whole daytime, nighttime thing?
I haven't made that up, right?
No.
Okay, yeah, because she does literally say they're in a race against time to do all their harvesting at night.
Because the sun will kill you,
Yeah, because the sun is so hot, and then, like, they're in the sun for the entire movie. No one seems to care. And then, you know, the big set piece, which is amazing, by the way, one of my favourite scenes in the entire movie, where they go out to see some harvesters, and they're in their little firefly kind of ships, and they fly about, and they see the sandworm approaching from miles away. They've got like 5 minutes before it hits, and they're like, "Hey, this happens all the time. We're really chilled out, and you know the machine is going to lift up the harvester, but then it can't. They have to rescue all the people, and it's like incredible and
love that.
Like so tense, and like probably my favourite scene in the entire film.
Yeah.
Such a great bit, but even even then I was thinking, despite how on the edge of my seat I was and how much I was enjoying it, I was like, why are they harvesting in the day? The one thing I know about harvesting, the one thing you told me about harvesting is that they only do it at night and then they race against time.
I mean, maybe they're doing it because, as we find out, Atreides have been left some like really shoddy equipment. They're really behind on production. They have to make sure that they get a certain amount of spice quickly.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
Okay,
so
okay, I buy that.
That's a fair point. Another kind of sticking point for me was this whole emphasis is like, yeah, the sun is going to kill you. So there's no water really on Arrakis. It's in theory, maybe it's underground, but it's nowhere. It's an extremely precious commodity, to the point that the Fremen will kill you for your water that is stored in your body. So, and if it is, and you get still suits, you get these. We're not putting them on again, but you get.
I'm on it right now. What are you talking? I'm in it right. I've pooed 6 times in this suit since we've been recording this video.
You get your still suit, which recycles your sweat and tears and other bodily fluids into something drinkable. That is like the level to which we are preserving water. Why do they have their faces out the whole time? Like, do you know how much? No, but genuinely, like.
Well, in fairness, there's that beautiful scene right at the very end where Paul and his mum are like part of the Fremen.
Yeah.
Now, okay. Lawrence of Arabia has finally become one with the people of Arrakis, and you know they're going to, I don't know, their house or whatever, wherever it is they're going across the dunes. And in fairness, all of the Fremen are wearing like masks and hoods, apart from Paul and Zendaya, who are like, we're so beautiful.
Look at our star power.
You think we're this beautiful and you think I'm going to wear a hood?
I mean, that's clearly it. Like, that you clearly have to see their faces to some degree. But it did, because I was thinking about this the whole time. I was like, oh my God, like, cover up your faces. Like, do you know how much is just coming out of your pores? Like, when you sweat, you're losing so much water. Like, you're really, so.
Let your suit do its job, for goodness sake.
Seriously, otherwise you're going to die. Okay, it wasn't enough to take me out of the movie, but there were things that I was like,
No, but I do find it weird, and I do find it kind of more worth mentioning in this movie than maybe other movies, because this movie is, I feel like it would almost be fair to describe this movie as an exercise in establishment and world building. Mm-hmm. So like this, there's tons of amazing action in this movie and some truly jaw-dropping spectacles, and you know, like the whole thing, like I say, it's a sensory overload. An incredible cinematic experience. I'm really glad we saw it in the cinema. We're going to talk more about that kind of like sensual experience in a bit. But, you know, essentially there's a case to be made that this movie is just an establishing shot for the story that's actually going to be told next.
I mean, I think the last line of the film is Zendaya going, "This is just the beginning."
Yeah. For a movie to be that dedicated to world building and setting up a story, to have logical inconsistencies that go against the very world that they're building in it. And I'm sure there are loads of people who are really familiar with the books who would be watching this and going, Taliesin, you're an idiot. This is I know why this is the case. Yeah. I know why they're harvesting in the day. I know, but I didn't get that from the movie. And so I'm left with these questions as to why are they harvesting in the day?
I think they're behind on their deadlines.
No, I was thinking about that as you were saying something else then, because I liked that as a reason. But then I thought, House Harkonnen are so brutal and so uncaring and so industrial. If it was possible to harvest in the day, they would just do it.
That makes sense.
Like, there's no way they wouldn't. So if it would, like, and the reason that we are told they harvest at night at the beginning is because it's not possible to harvest in the day because it's just too hot. But and if it were, they would do it. So I don't believe. I think it's just an inconsistency. Question 5: who are the other people who kind of span across the houses? Because we see the different houses.
Yeah.
Atreides, and we see Harkonnen, and we see some delegates of like the Emperor themselves. But there are some people who appear to be kind of across the board just members of society. Stephen McKinley Henderson's character and David Dastmalchian's character, okay, and obviously Stephen McKinley Henderson's character is part of House Atreides, and David Dastmalchian's character is part of House Harkonnen. but they are also clearly of the same race or sect. So they both have the kind of the mark on their lip.
Yeah.
And they at points in the movie, someone asks them a question and their eyes go white.
Yeah.
And they like do some calculations and they come back. And they both do that. And they're in different houses. So I feel like they are a race that kind of is spread out across the Empire, and they have like certain powers that you need.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I guess there are navigators on the starships, and they have certain abilities that interact with their use of spice that allows them interstellar travel. Maybe they're a different race and stuff as well, so they are spread out all across the Empire and, you know, within different houses. And I get the feeling these guys, they're kind of like in Earthsea wizards, go to different countries and towns.
Like everyone gets one of these guys.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And so, because like the line Oscar Isaac says to him is, how much did it cost for them to get here when the Empire's delegates come? And his eyes go, and he goes, it cost a centillion, trillion, billion. And Oscar Isaac's like, that's very expensive. Yeah, so I having not, I'm sure it's all very explained in the books.
Yeah.
But that's a question I have, is like, who are those guys and why are they in all the different houses?
Yeah, so you have those guys. You have also the Bene Gesserit, the witches, who are their own thing, but who have kind of delegates and representatives. Like they have one that goes to the Emperor. They have Charlotte Rampling, who kind of communes with the Harkonnen. You can destroy House Atreides. Apparently, this is what the Emperor wants.
He's going to give you these soldiers.
He's gonna give you this stuff. Leave the boy and his mum. We like them.
They're under our protection. Yeah.
Yeah, but otherwise, so they also have like they're their own thing, but they have like delegates to all of the houses.
Is the implication that they maybe wield a bit more power than they make out? Because I mean, they can literally control people with their voice, right?
Well, this is the thing, and I think it's implied that whenever they're talked about, it's like, oh, they kind of deal from the shadows. And I think Paul sees this and is like, what you mean? You guys are just controlling everything, you know? So they, you know, and they have this long plan apparently that it's been playing out for centuries. So the idea is that they are quite powerful in their own right. I mean, there are also bound to be more houses.
Oh yeah, sure.
There aren't just two houses.
So there's explicit mention of that. And what's interesting is when Paul says, you know, if we get word out to the other houses that the Empire, that the Emperor has ordered our destruction, that would cause chaos. Like the idea that they kind of live in this very tense kind of peace because the Emperor says. I feel like everyone acknowledged that the Emperor's gift to House Atreides of the planet and of Arrakis was a double-edged sword that was going to kind of hurt them in the long run and would cause them danger and put them in a really bad situation, was one thing, because that's like politics. But there's very much the implication that the Emperor explicitly lending House Harkonnen the Sardaukar, like his own personal force, the Empire's blades, right? That's beyond the pale, and that's actually crossing a line which he's not supposed to do, and that wouldn't be acceptable to the other houses and would. Because I think when Charlotte Rampling even visits House Harkonnen, she says no one must know about the soldiers.
Oh yeah, they put like the silence.
Oh yeah, I love
which
that.
I love that.
I love all the world building kind of like parts. I love those like big lights that follow you around. So cool. And I love, and this is something else that I think is a great part of the visual language of the movie, is the personal force fields and stuff as well. So great. And I love.
Let me just switch mine on.
Yeah, well, I love Skarsgård one, which is his ring on his finger, which he just taps like that before he goes in to listen to what Oscar Isaac's saying. And it's great. You know, it's a cool little idea anyway. The idea that, you know, it will kind of deflect most parries, but you can get it through if you really try. Which is why, of course, most people use handheld swords and knives as opposed to kind of projectiles.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, because you see people like fire projectiles at people, and they're kind of working their way through.
Yeah, it's only if it's like a really thin needle that it can get through.
And you have time to literally kind of take it out of your force field before it makes it through, which is really awesome. Yeah. There's that brilliant bit where Oscar Isaac got shot with it, and it was just behind him, and he couldn't reach it. Yeah. So it was kind of like this desperate kind of flailing. And it's great. And the fact that it flashes blue when it deflects a shot, but flashes red when it doesn't, creates this great kind of visual language of when forces are fighting each other, because you see like these eruptions of blue and red happening all over the battlefield. Cool. And it's like, really, really cool. Yeah. Does a lot of the storytelling just through kind of colour, which is fantastic, and I thought really, really effective. There's an implication that the Doctor The Chinese doctor.
Hey man, it was written in a different time.
Is kind of psychic as well, and uses actual magical powers in his kind of in his doctorship, and has a specific symbol to denote the power that he has, which kind of means that he was always going to be a medic, right? And he was always, because he has the power that medics have, which is what makes me think that navigators are a certain type of kind of power that they have as well, and that they need the spice for it. Also because I've played a lot of Warhammer 40,000, and it just lifts all of that, I suspect, now from Dune. Question 6: how can we never see any space travel?
Oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah,
this is really interesting. Yeah, because we travel, like, from the home planet of House Atreides.
There's loads of space travel in this movie.
Yeah, there are loads of different planets. We go physically where House Harkonnen is based, where House Atreides is based. We go to Arrakis.
But we're not just like going across the universe by camera. Like House Atreides travel across the universe to Arrakis.
It's a big deal.
Harkonnen travel across the universe to Arrakis.
Yeah, but we never see any of the travel. We don't see any of the ships. We do.
It's the reason Arrakis is important. Like, the reason Arrakis is important is because it has spice, and they need it for interplanetary travel and for intergalactic travel. And why don't we see any of that? Because it's so important. It's like the whole reason the story exists.
Yeah, maybe. I feel like maybe we're going to learn about that. Maybe we're going to learn about, like, spice itself as well. Because the thing I know about Dune before coming into the film, it's like there's sandworms, there's spice, which has been described to me as like a Class A drug, but also crude oil. And apparently it has psychoactive properties. You can trip on it, but also it makes you really powerful, and also it's needed for like interstellar space travel. So I have a feeling maybe we'll see more of that.
I think it's more like LSD than anything else, isn't it? And the reason, I don't know, man, but I'm guessing that the reason it's used in interplanetary space travel is because, again, these navigators, they're like hooked up to the ship or whatever, and it gives them like the hallucinations give them a kind of second sight, because we know that it can cause prophecy in Paul. Like, Paul has prophecy in his dreams, but he has real-time prophecies when he's like under the influence of unrefined spice. But so like intergalactic travel is something that happens in the movie. It's a very important part of the universe and the story. More than one group of very important characters who we are following go on very long space journeys as part of the story that we are following. Like, we see them on their own planet, they say goodbye, they get on their big ships. We never see the point of view of them traveling in space. We don't know what it consists of. We don't know how it works. The implication from the movie is that it really doesn't take very long. It's no kind of like, see you in a couple of years when we get to Iraq. It's pretty much instantaneous, like driving to a different town or something. But we don't know that because we don't see it. And you know, it's something that's kind of haunted me about this movie, because we see space shots. We see, like, ships arriving through the big kind of, like, man-made wormhole gate thing outside Arrakis, which, you know, is probably part of the interstellar travel, right? But we see ships arriving, but we never see inside the ships when they're in space. And we just don't know what it's like. It means that everything we witness is very explicitly planet-based. You know, we only see people on planets. We don't see them on space. And even though they've all spent time in space and they all know what space travel consists of, we don't. So what that creates is, I think something the movie does really, really well is creating a sense of an alien world when House Atreides go to Arrakis, and everything's different, and nothing makes sense to them, you know, to their sensibilities and stuff, and you know, things are just alien and weird and different, despite the fact that it has been settled. And I feel like not seeing how they get there and not seeing the space travel really helps that. And because, you know, suddenly they're just like marooned on this island. And then when the Harkonnen forces arrive with the Empire's blades, these huge spaceships arriving in the air, again, because we don't know what it looks like inside those spaceships, and we don't know the process of them getting there in those spaceships, it feels like an alien invasion, you know, because we don't have that reference. You know, these are big faceless like orbs firing huge, and even the way like the missiles kind of travel.
Well, there's
and come down.
gravity, right?
Yeah,
Everything drops down. Everything's always just coming down from the sky. It's cool. It's really cool. And I agree with you. It kind of it grounds everything on the planet, which I think is important because Arrakis is one of the characters, right? The planet. It's called Dune. The movie's called Dune. It's about Dune. It's about what's happening there. And so it kind of, it gives us this this really grounded feel, which you can sometimes lose with sci-fi and space dramas, which begin to feel sometimes like you press a button, you go and you go through space and it means nothing. But I'm with you totally. I think the not focusing on the space travel actually just turns the focus onto the planet and what's happening there.
I'm super intrigued now to learn if they describe the space travel in the book.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a lack of focus on the space travel in this movie, it's a lack of acknowledgement even. It's they don't talk about it, they don't show it, they don't it's just they're just there now, and we know they came on ships, and that's another thing I love when ships land and stuff, how quiet they are and how soft they are.
It's even though they're so big.
Yeah, exactly. So great. For me, the peak of the movie was very much that attack on Arrakis by the Harkonnen, and I feel for me the whole movie became less interesting after that, and that was so very much a climax of not just the interesting world building that we got up to that point, and not just the fulfillment of the threat that the story was originally based on. That's the whole story at first. It's we've been given this charge. It's not a great one. It's kind of like a bullet, to be honest.
And poison chalice.
Yeah, and then the poison comes, the bullet comes, and so it's kind of the climax of the whole kind of tension that was set up at the beginning, and also a visual and sensory climax as well. It's horrifying and kind of huge and blew my eyeballs out and my eardrums out. And so the rest of the movie, although it very specifically moves to a much more personal kind of level at that point, and they make a huge deal out of that, right? We'll get to that section anyway. But so space travel and its lack of acknowledgement was something that was really fascinating for me.
Question 7. I feel like I've seen this whole Messiah in the desert story before.
Oh, we're going back to coding. Can't we just talk about all the explosions and stuff? That's amazing.
Sorry, this is okay. So this isn't a question. This is just a bit more of an observation, but I think it's worth pointing out. Okay, I mean there is the obvious Messiah in a desert crossing the desert.
Yeah, I mean he's literally referred to as a Messiah.
He is literally the Messiah,
and everyone knows that he is supposed to be the Messiah. It's really interesting because Charlotte Rampling is very angry with Paul's mum for giving birth to a boy and having ideas about her station, because in doing so, Paul's mum has very explicitly tried to give birth to the Messiah. That's their whole plan. Their whole plan is to genetically engineer through bloodlines someone who is powerful enough to be the Messiah and who is the Messiah, and that is when the boy will be born, when the bloodlines are strong enough, right? So she was told, you're not the one who's giving birth to the Messiah. We still got some bloodlines to go, right?
Keep going.
And she's like, nah, mate, I'm giving birth to the Messiah. And that's what she does. And so he's here now.
She wants to and she doesn't want to, because when she realizes what's happening, she's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, kind of maybe should have thought that one through a bit more. And obviously the Order is very upset with that, but also acknowledges that, okay, you're here, you're under our protection. And they say, this is something that I'd like your take on, they say they have laid the way in Arrakis. So they have been there and they have been preparing the Fremen. And we see Fremen who are in the desert and freedom fighters, but we see Fremen who are very much part of the industrialization and the occupation as well. We see Fremen who work as housekeepers and as intermediaries and stuff like that. So the Fremen aren't exclusively kind of guerrilla fighters in the desert. They also, there's an assimilation to them as well for many of them. So those are the ones that it's mostly this groundwork has been laid with, the Messiah has now been born, and the Messiah is here, and he's coming. And did you hear that prophecy that the Messiah would have floppy curly hair and a weirdly angular chin? Did you hear that one? I don't know. The Fremen and the people of Arrakis recognize Paul as the Messiah as soon as they see him, pretty much, because as is explained in the movie, they've been told what to expect.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting, and again makes me wonder about the whole sect, like the Bene Gesserit, what they're up to and what they're doing, because the implication is that they have kind of come to Arrakis, they've kind of sown the seeds, and clearly the Fremen are religious, like they worship the worm, like,
and the spice, like, don't we all worship the worm?
Yeah. And before, like, the geologist is killed, she's like, I have one master, and it's the Shai Hulud, which is, like, their name for the worms. And I was like, so good. And, of course, they have, like, their sacred knives, which are made from the worm's teeth.
Yes, like, so great.
So they're already, like, a religious people, if you want to call them
and
that.
that's amplified by the spice.
Yeah.
Whether it's caused by or if it's just a facilitator, the spice is very important in the practice of their religion.
And it turns their eyes blue, right? That's how you know they've been exposed to the spice for so long and so consistently. So it's interesting. So they are religious people, but they've been, like, given these seeds, which may or may not be true. And Charlotte Rampling at one point is like, I mean, your son might be the Messiah. We've got others lined up in case this one doesn't work out.
It's really interesting because Paul certainly has a lot of power.
Yeah.
He passes the box test.
He does.
Put your hand in the box. I don't know if I could pass that test. I will not put my hand in the box. Absolutely not.
You're not putting your hand in the box.
I think that test could be made much... I feel like that test could be much harder. Like, you put your hand in the box and he goes, what's in the box? And she says, pain. I'm like, yeah, whatever. You put your hand in the box, like, what's in the box? Something squelchy. You put something squelchy in that box, like, my hand is coming out, I'm getting stabbed in the neck by that needle, okay? You tell me pain, I'm like, fine, I will prepare for pain, right? But something squelchy. Oh, you're right. There is something squelchy in there. I just feel like your box test could be harder, guys. He is shown to have, like, premonition dreams, kind of in his own sleep.
He has gifts and power. He has something.
Yeah, and also other kind of visions which are activated by spice. So he clearly has, like, immense power, and it wouldn't be completely unfeasible for him to be the Messiah. Everyone thinks he's the Messiah. He doesn't really fancy it. Or how does he feel about it? I don't really understand.
It's not clear.
Do you know why? Because he's not a good actor.
Okay, maybe you've got something there. I think it's just not clear. And, like, what does the Messiah do? I mean, he has these premonitions. He has these visions of himself, like, looking out onto like a kind of a war-torn, like, land, like supposedly some kind of, like, uprising or revolution, but also a lot of destruction and, like, bodies being burned. And he sees himself at the helm of something happening, and you don't know whether, like, it's good that he has this power.
Cards on the table. My least favorite thing in fantasy is chosen one narratives.
I know.
Like, I hate them so much because, especially, like, prophesized chosen one narratives. Like, they're the absolute worst. I know this book was written in 1965, so whatever. But still, I absolutely hate them. I find, like, most of the ways that this story, I'm going to say movie, but I'm assuming it's the same in the book, handles that is really, really cool. Like, this idea that it has been kind of, you know, set up by other external forces. So there's this doubt with him of how much kind of truth there is in it, and whether there's truth or not, it's mostly for political expediency for someone. But just, like, the thing I enjoyed about it the most was the kind of the mysterious things that you got. When we see Stilgar for the first time, Javier Bardem, who is, like, a proper actor. Don't know why we didn't mention him at first. He's amazing in this movie, by the way. I love him so much.
A few times he shows up.
He's so good.
Got great presence.
I'd cast that man in literally anything.
Yeah, he's so good.
Any part in any movie, I'd cast him. He's brilliant. But when he first turns up, and, you know, he does his whole kind of, this is my world, and blah blah. You don't understand my customs, but I'm very brusque, and that's how I do. Again, quite Lawrence of Arabia, honestly. But on his way out, he just turns around to Paul and he goes, "I recognize you," and that kind of stuff is really cool. Where Kays is checking their suits, and she goes, "You've put your boot slipshod over the ankle. You've worn one of these suits before."
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, it just seemed like the obvious way to put it on." And she's like, "He will know your ways without even trying," or some part of the prophecy.
Yeah,
you know?
and, like, people pick up on it and they're like, Okay. And even if they're not being kind of like fanatical about it, they're like, okay, signs point to something
and
here.
All of the Fremen know it.
Yeah.
Like, all the Fremen know this is the guy that's supposed to be, like, even the ones we meet out in the desert who are about to kill them. They're like, oh, you're the one who's supposed to be, they call him the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from another world. And they all know that he is supposed to be, like, you know, there's no one who's like, oh, is that guy supposed to be?
Like, no, that's the one.
Yeah, and it's so the discussion is then, it's like advanced from that. It's like, do you think he is the Lisan al-Gaib? It's like, he seems so young, you know. But everyone knows it's supposed to be him. So the question is, you know, I've seen this Messiah in the desert thing at all before. Do you think that's where it comes from in the initial kind of writing of it? Do you think is there a Jesus allegory? Because again, it's just like it feels a bit old-fashioned to me. It's not Return of the Jedi. It's not where, like, the kind of uncivilized people start worshipping C-3PO as a god because they happen to have a totem pole that looks like him. It's not that, but it's not that.
No.
You know? It's like...
So, I mean, it's a device, right? And it's a device, like, from a book from the 60s where there's a young man who has gifts, who is going to come to a certain people. And, well, the thing is, we don't know what his gift is, right? We don't know what he's going to, like, bring to the Fremen. Yeah. Even if he is the Messiah, like, what their Messiah. What does that mean? Does he mean he, like, frees them from kind of colonial rule? We don't know what that means yet. So it's ambiguous at this point. I mean, the reason I bring up this whole, like, Messiah in the desert thing, and it's funny that you mentioned Star Wars, because, you know, when you watch Dune, you're like, I feel like I've seen some of these things before. Like, there's a young guy. He's really gifted. He's on a desert planet right now. There's a thing called The Voice, which is run by this, like, sect of people who use it as a form of, like, mind control. Okay, this is going to be talked about, like, in loads of other videos by other people and things. There are loads of Star Wars references that draw from Dune. Loads of things draw from Dune. But I think what's really interesting now is having Dune come out, having Star Wars come out, having David Lynch Dune come out, having this Dune come out, is how they're now kind of bound up together, like, forever in ways you can't escape. So one thing while I was watching the film, I was like, how is, like, desert space technology portrayed? Because I have a really specific vision of how it looks, and it's really influenced by Star Wars.
I mean, does that make kind of, you know, the visual design of a film like Dune harder then? Because you're like, we have to, rather than just kind of recreate what we see from the book and, like, how we imagine it, we have to do that, but we also have to specifically try not to make it look like Star Wars.
Exactly. Yeah. Which makes me wonder and think more about David Lynch's Dune, which is probably why he went so wild and campy.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Because he was like, so I got to get away from, like, a very particular space aesthetic. Let's give Sting a giant cod piece and weird hair.
Well, you said Sting's character's not in the film yet, so I'm still waiting for that giant cod piece. How do you know that's not part of the book? I don't know that's not part of the book. I'm waiting for it. I can't wait. I think the desert stuff is really important, though, because, I mean, we've said before that it's when Paul gets Paul gets out into the desert, right? That the actual story, in a way, can be said to begin. And that's, we talk very much about the grandiose kind of epic scale of everything that happens before that. But I mean, the film shows us the kind of the change of focus once they get to the desert. And it's kind of marked very metaphorically with them going through a sandstorm, right? So you've had all these huge explosions, massive ships, mass murder, slaughter, like huge floating death machines in the sky, like you've been in the industrial complex of Arrakis, and very metaphorically they fly through a sandstorm and come out the other side. Okay, and when they do and they crash, everything's a lot more quiet and everything's a lot more sparse, and there isn't any technology anywhere. And the first thing he sees when he comes out from under the sand where they've been sleeping in the morning is a tiny rodent kind of jumping along, who is using its natural kind of wiles to make water. We very explicitly see the sweat dripping down inside its ears, you know, and it's making use of that water, right? And it's like drinking its own sweat. So we go from this huge focus on technology and on industry and on like the layering of scale, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Fish eating a fish, eating a shark, eating a whale. And suddenly we come out the other side of the sandstorm, and the focus is now on the personal and on the small and in the individual and his trip across the desert, right?
Yeah.
Where he will find himself. Who knows how long the trip is going to take across the desert? If I had to hazard a guess.
Oh, no.
But, you know, and so like they very explicitly show us that rodent and how it survives by itself without the use of all this grand technology. And you know, it's very much a metaphor of what Paul is going to become and the journey that he's on from now on in. And that starts with him kind of proving himself, just like Lawrence of Arabia does, to the Fremen by combat, which is like a really funny scene, that because he's just effortlessly better at fighting than the Fremen guy.
Yeah. Well, do you know where he gets that from?
Well, he's trained within an inch of his life. Like, he's a duke's son, and he has been trained since birth to fight, right?
But specifically, it's because of his mum and their training. And I feel like that's like, it's referenced a tiny bit, but not enough. You see her fight as well.
Because they do the swirly fighting.
Exactly.
That's the fighting they do.
Yeah, they do this, like, and apparently the Bene Gesserit are also like master fighters.
Sure.
Which you wouldn't necessarily know from just them floating around in robes all of the time.
Yeah, totally.
But that is where
okay.
it comes
I feel like that isn't
well.
portrayed in the film. Is that something you just know from?
It is something that I read.
Interesting. Okay.
But I agree, it doesn't come through in the film.
There is a lot of emphasis put on his combat training at the beginning. So like it's fair that he's just really good at fighting, unexpectedly so, perhaps given his like size and strength and stuff. But it does still come across a little bit like the tiny white guy just effortlessly dispatching the guy who lives in the desert, and that's his entire life. And whatever, man. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But there is, it's a surprise, and he doesn't want to kill him, but then he just does, and it's very much him becoming, you know, this thing of he has now taken a life, and he didn't want to, and he tried not to, you know, he realized that he had to do it as part of his journey. Yeah. Because you know, when he kills the guy, his mum is still like, no, Paul needs to get off planet. And he turns around and he has changed. And like in that moment, he's become, you know, a man in a way. And he just goes, no, mother, I must stay here and do my father's work. Yeah. And do my father's work.
Yeah, I know. Well, and it's also very explicitly like kind of old school hero's journey. Like
sure.
He's had his trial. He's becoming a man. Like he's great.
Also, the hot girl didn't like him, but then he killed some dude, and now the hot girl likes him.
All right.
Hot girl's like, I won't be needing this hood.
I also felt like there are way too many just like portrait shots of her. I mean, she's lovely, but like, so many shots of her just going...
We've paid her literally millions of dollars to be in this movie for like 20 minutes.
And just too many shots of her, like, I mean, walking. I get it,
She's going to be the main character in the next movie, right?
Exactly, clearly there's some kind of love interest, but like, there's just so many... And it's like, I get it. Like, I think I only needed to see it once, but it just kept happening.
I'm never going to complain about Zendaya being on the screen.
No.
Still.
But
I do absolutely agree with you.
I get it. Yeah, she's very beautiful in slow motion. I love it.
I feel like this is something they tried to do, and that she tried to do, and I think they could have done more. You know, in all of the kind of the dreamscapes that we see of her, she's very floaty and very very smiley, and then when she turns up, she's like, whoa, and she's like quite rough and quite sort of, and I feel like they could have pushed that more.
I think so.
That contrast between how he's seen her in his dreams and how she actually, because like she lives in the desert and she kills stuff, right? She kills people for their water. And I feel like there could have been more of a contrast in physicality and the way that she presented that character.
I agree.
Even if just at the beginning, just to have that marked contrast.
Yeah. Question 8: is there such a thing as too much Hanz Zimmer?
So, the tweet I wrote when I got home from watching this movie was, Dune is very loud. Because Dune is very loud. It's such a loud movie, and like we saw it in the cinema. We didn't see it in like a huge cinema. We didn't see it in like an IMAX or something. In fact, like the screen was relatively small. And they really went ham on the sound to kind of make up for it.
The seats were shaking most of the time.
And that is to do with Hans Zimmer's score, which, much like the visuals of the movie that we have explained plenty, and how big and grand and the scale of them, Hans Zimmer steps up and matches that in his soundtrack.
Yeah, and I feel like he almost exceeds himself, because a lot of the soundtrack becomes noise. A lot of it is noise, and it's brilliant because it totally works for me. It kind of goes beyond like music to just kind of pure sound and noise. And we've talked about the sci-fi before. You know the one.
The Hans Zimmer yeah, totally.
The and you see it everywhere now, and it's effective. I still think it's quite good. I feel like we've kind of become a little bit desensitized to it because you expect it from like a big loud sci-fi, and I think it's really good.
I think it's like almost the ultimate Hans Zimmer experience.
Exactly.
I feel like this is the movie that Hans Zimmer was born to score.
Yeah.
You know, because I used to think that about Interstellar, but Interstellar's too small. Interstellar's like, it's too personal.
Yeah.
It's too focused on the individual. Whereas this, you know, it's about planetscapes, and it's about skies being filled.
And like things
and it's about
really
huge
slowly.
worms.
Yeah.
And it's much more. So Interstellar is like, okay, I like Interstellar just fine, but Interstellar is very much kind of like 2001 for people that didn't understand 2001 in many ways.
God,
no.
Can't say
I'm
that.
sorry. It's a great movie. It's really, really good. But what Interstellar lacks that 2001 has are just what you said, those very slow-moving kind of just stuff happens slowly here because it's really big and like so big you can't even really imagine how big it is.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
And that's something that Dune has very much in spades.
So
Interstellar
good.
didn't, and Hans Zimmer's score works so much better for that kind of 2001 style, just grand, slow-moving scale. It works fantastically. Like there's very few moments of kind of textbook action in this film. You have fighting, and you have like armies running at each other, but that's not really where the spectacle comes from. The spectacle comes from the spaceship that dropped off the armies.
Yeah.
You know, and there's the bit where Josh Brolin is holding on to Paul as they take off in the ship, and the sandworm eats the thing. But you know, in most movies, the action part of that is the holding on, but that's actually shown kind of out of focus and in the foreground and kind of in silhouette. And the thing that we're actually looking at is the scale of the worm just consuming the harvester. I thought you only harvested in the night, but here we are in the day. What an unexpected treat.
I thought I had a few more hours to sleep under the sand until I eat you.
I think this is, in many ways, the ultimate Hans Zimmer score.
I agree.
In a movie that couldn't have been designed better for Hans Zimmer.
No, it's so perfect, and it's so big. Everything is so big.
You do have that thing that you get in Interstellar as well, of there are lines that you do not hear.
No.
There is speech which you suspect is quite important that you just do not hear. And you know, in the famous one in Interstellar is where Michael Caine is basically explaining something very important on his deathbed. It's like Michael Caine's final words, and to the extent where most people came out of Interstellar were like, oh, we're not supposed to hear those words. It's supposed to be kind of a mystery, and they're supposed to be covered by the music. And Christopher Nolan was like, oh no, those are really important lines. You're supposed to hear those. And you're like, what?
It's not supposed to be like a lost in translation moment.
Exactly.
Like,
you're supposed to hear the lines. You just don't, because Zimmer's like, and there are lines like that which I'm really hoping aren't important in Dune, because I did not hear them.
I missed a couple. I was
absolutely.
just like too busy like vibrating in my seat. I was just like,
I suspect they weren't supposed to be important. And again, like, you know, that sign of things becoming more personal when he goes out into the desert. You go from very metallic, very kind of noise, like you were saying, but big open noise. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And you go into the chanting of, which is obviously coded in a certain way that we recognise from our reality, right? But which is also, it's people's voices, and it's actual kind of individuals and a group, a community kind of coming together to make the noise now, rather than it being created by kind of unhuman hands, as it were.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a purposeful choice. It is overloading. It is very, and it's supposed to overload you. So I mean, I for me, like I say, the peak of the movie is the attack on Arrakis, and even though the story kind of starts after that, really, I felt like I was melted at that point. I felt like I was fried. Like that whole thing had just wiped me out. And the sandstorm was almost one step too far for me and one step too far for my brain. And that was just like, that was the straw that kind of broke my concentration a little bit almost.
I totally agree with you. This is, I think, a good spot to talk a little bit about, how the sound design, Hanz Zimmer, but also Villeneuve's visuals. And I think the cinematographer who worked on this also worked on The Mandalorian. So you get the sense of
loves deserts.
I mean, has an amazing eye for it. But like visually, and this is what I expected to some degree going into the film, because I've seen some of his other stuff, like it's very, very beautiful, huge scale. Just these amazing depictions of sci-fi for me personally, which I feel like camera often struggles to show because people favor like fast action instead. And I think I have a theory that like I think humans can only handle so much of that in one go. And it's really funny because Tally and I, just before the film, we went and we had a really nice lunch. And we were both, I mean, it is really basic. It was just like a sandwich and a salad and stuff. But it was so good. And we did that really annoying thing where we had a really good lunch and we were like, this is so good. This is so good. I am having like a food experience. I'm having like this pleasurable physical sensory experience. And like we were just going on about it. So then it made perfect sense to go into this film, which is the same thing. And I was thinking about it the whole time in the beginning. I'm like, wow, it's like I am just being washed over with these like stunning visuals and sound, and like the people are beautiful. And I'm like, oh, but yeah, really after about an hour and a half of that, like I'm wiped. You do become a little bit numb to it. And I agree with you, actually. The sandstorm was almost too much. Like at that point, I started feeling like battered around a little bit. Whereas before I felt like I could ride it, and I was like, oh my God, I'm actually like, So then when things kind of calm down a bit, once he kind of joins the Fremen in the desert, in a way, the scale changes. And then at the end, the music picks up again and becomes extremely epic to signal that it is the end of the movie. And I was like, oh, God, like, I don't know if I can do this again.
But the movie is very much more about the personal now, is what I'm guessing.
Yes, okay, that's how it feels.
We've had every signifier of that. And so, I mean, I'm guessing that the music will reflect that. All the kind of bits of the future that he saw regarding the Fremen. It was him and Zendaya, like, in a little cavern, kind of, like, quite small, not like a grand... They have to spend so much time hiding and being out of the sun and all the rest of it. And there's a sense that everything's going to be a bit more reined in for a time at least in the second movie. And you got that amazing ending shot, which had been kind of teased by Kaze before she's killed, where she puts her thumper down and she gets out her like kind of pickaxes.
I was like, ride the worm.
And she's going to ride the worm. And I didn't know that was a thing. Right, so I was like, she's going to ride the worm, and then she gets run through and she dies, and fine. But then you get that beautiful final shot of the movie where they're walking towards Fremenville, and you just see the worm, and you see someone riding it. And this kind of huge worm that had been portrayed as this kind of ruthless monster, because we'd only ever seen it through the lens of the occupiers and the industrial, like, imperial forces, right? And of course, it's just this thing to be avoided and killed if you can, but essentially just out of the way. It's like just keep it out. And then the Fremen, of course, you have the marriage of the human and the worm, like the metaphor for living at one with your surroundings, as it were. Like even this huge beast can be kind of not tamed but lived with and adapted to and sort of lived in harmony with to a certain extent.
Oh my God, I was so ready when I saw her with
I know.
the grappling hooks. I was like, she's gonna ride the worm, and then they took it away from me, and then they bring it back at the end, which is so good.
And I just love the way that as she exited that scene, she was like, I'm Fremen, the desert is what I do, and that's what she meant. She's like, I'm just gonna ride a worm. And then you see that, and it's so great. And I'm looking. I hope that is something that they are, because that's certainly how it seems to have been set up. I really hope the second movie does take a more personal look at like the society there, which will make like the wider intergalactic kind of situation feel even bigger and more like pitiless and heartless and what have you, and just seeing this small community, or not small community, there's millions of them, but
it's interesting because thinking about that was a moment of kind of like wonder at the end, whereas despite the whole scale in the beginning, most of the film, it's not really a sense of wonder, it is just a sense of, I guess, awe, or it's
but
sublime,
awe in the proper sense,
right? It is just so big, it's so hard to comprehend. The music is like blowing you away constantly. You feel very small, but now you have this moment where you're like, oh, that there is this kind of like human scale wonder that's happening, and I wonder if that's gonna come out more in the second one.
Yeah, totally, because they're kind of like in many ways, not just the way they're presented like physically and visually, but they're in many ways the antithesis of everything that's happening out in space. So they want the spice for their own personal experiences and their own personal health, right? And because it's a way that they live at one with their surroundings, whereas the Empire is very much extraction, and it's very much that in everything it does. So it extracts the spice, it goes there, it builds a massive thing, it extracts the spice. It's like, we need that, we're not even going to bother with the Fremen. We'll kill them when we find them, and there's not many of them anyway, and who cares? There's a massive worm here, build huge walls that go right under the ground to stop them coming through. The end. We don't have to worry about them anymore. Fine. When one of our harvesters is accidentally harvesting in the day and a worm is coming along, we'll just go ahead and lift it right out. That kind of sense of extraction exists in the whole of the Empire itself. So the Emperor is like, I'm a bit worried about how powerful this house is getting, so I'm gonna pretty much I'm gonna extract them from their homeworld, and I'm gonna put them here where they are ducks in a barrel to be wiped out. And furthermore, the most important thing in the entire universe is spice. I'm going to actually put the harvesting of that spice in jeopardy to wipe out this house, just because they scare me that much. And this this sense of kind of consuming and extraction is very much something that this whole universe does, and that is kind of, on the face of it, and I might be completely wrong because I haven't read the books, but on the face of it, the Fremen are kind of like the opposite of that. They live in harmony, and they find a way to coexist, and it's just super interesting to me, and I hope that's one of the themes that they kind of explore more.
Me too.
Which would have to be represented in a slight shift in focus of visual presentation and soundscape as well, which is how I got
See
there.
See ya, Hans. No.
Question 9. Is that the worm's mouth, or is it the bumhole?
Question 10. Is this a movie?
Does this Dune movie work as a movie in its own right? Like, if there was no part 2, and this was the only Dune movie that was made, is that a good movie? Or does it need, can it only be justified by having a follow-up movie?
It's interesting. I saw a discussion going on somewhere on the internet where someone was like, "There's very little character development."
I'm not sure.
Well, there is some. There's things happen. There isn't much plot. Not much actually happens.
No.
There are a few key moments that happen, and that's it. So it's minimal character development in some people's eyes. Not much plot. What does that count for? However, I would argue that a good film needs neither of those things. Those are two things that good films often have, that they can have, but I would say that they don't necessarily need to have that.
I'm going to find out right now how long it takes the David Lynch movie to tell the story of this Dune movie. Okay, so I just literally rented the David Lynch Dune on YouTube right now.
Can't wait to watch it properly.
And got to worked out how long it takes to tell the whole story of this first movie. So it tells the story of this Dune in an hour and a half, pretty much. And this is a 2.5 hour movie, which means it only takes, I was expecting to be literally double the length.
Yeah.
But it only takes an hour longer to tell this story than the David Lynch movie, which surprises me, honestly.
Me too.
To be fair. But yeah, so okay, maybe there's less payoff coming up in the second movie than I think.
I don't know.
I don't know, man.
Oh, we're going to have to wait until 2023.
It does work as a movie in its own right for you. If there was not to be another Dune movie, would you be not okay with that? Because obviously you want there to be one. Yeah. But would this movie still be a good movie if there was no other movie after it?
I think purely for like the cinematic experience, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's worth it for me. And some people are like, no, it's not enough. But I think it's plenty for me.
Yeah, me too. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of it. And, throughout the whole opening hour and a half at least, I thought it was one of the best sci-fi movies I've ever seen. It kind of really speaks to me.
So good.
I love how serious it is.
It's so po-faced.
No jokes in this movie.
There are no jokes,
it's
but that's
so
okay.
serious. No,
that's
exactly.
Okay.
But that's what sci-fi is all about. That's my childhood sci-fi right there. No quips, no one-liners. Like proper, just serious sci-fi action and messaging and analogy and metaphor.
I'm with you. I'm so into it.
It's so great. So, when is the next one due to come out?
2023.
Are you joking me?
We're going to have to wait another 2 years.
Are you seriously telling me they haven't already made the other one?
Bear in mind, this one was also delayed. It was supposed to come out last year.
God.
But very wisely, they're like, people need to watch this in cinemas. Let's hold off for a little bit longer.
And they still haven't made the other one, even though they delayed this one? This is outrageous. What are you even playing? Hanz,
I know.
Write your score, Hanz. Come on. I'll help you out. Just put that in. I have pooed 12 times in this sand suit since
Good thing you're wearing your suit.
Oh, thank goodness for that. Well,
still
it's time.
suit.
It's time. It's still suit. That's right. It's time for us to go outside again, Evitel.
Okay.
And I guess we'll see you in like 2 years.
Yeah, I can't wait
to let you know how the story finished.
I mean, maybe it'll come sooner after I read all 900 pages of Dune
and all the sequels,
and then we can have a talk.
You've got to have that context. One of us has to know what we're talking about in the next video.
I've heard about the sequels. I'm not reading them.
Oh. Well, thank you for joining us today to talk about Dune. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real-life money to make all of our videos happen. And you really do, guys. Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll see you for the next T&E Talks. And until then, from me, Taliesin.
And me, Evitel.
Cheerio.